John chapter 13:21. After saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." John chapter 13:26 through 27. So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then, after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "What are you going to do? Do quickly." John chapter 13:33. Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I have said to you, the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this all people will know you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. John chapter 13:37 through 38. Peter said to him, "Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." Jesus answered, "Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. John chapter 14:19. Yet a little while the world will see me no more, but you will see me, because I live in you. Because I live, you will also live. Matthew chapter 26:38 through 39. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Matthew 26:42. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Matthew 26:44 through 46. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep, and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand."
So tonight thank you, Brinkley. Tonight we are finishing up this series on fear. We started this series at the beginning of the month, and we simply looked at how is the appropriate way for us to handle fear. And we've gone through kind of a step-by-step process, if you will. The first week we said the first thing you have to do, you have to name your fear. You have to be honest about it. You have to be willing to say, this is my fear, this is what I'm afraid of, and we have to be able to step into that. The second thing is we have to begin to understand our fears. We have to be willing to ask some difficult questions to really comprehend why those fears are a part of our lives and how we can lessen the effect of those fears in our lives. And so real quick, I'm going to give you those questions again. They are, what about this fear? What is it about this fear that makes it a part of my life? Is there anything I can do to lessen the chances that this fear may happen? Is there something I can do, or what's the likelihood of this fear happening? Is there something I can do to lessen the likelihood of this happening? And if so, what help do I need to get in order to help myself lessen the likelihood? Or if this fear is happening, what help do I need to get to help me as I deal with this difficult situation? And so the third week, last week, we simply looked at this idea that you pray into your fear, that you go to God and you are honest. And we talked about how a lot of times we aren't super honest in our prayers. There's a lot of reasons for that, but I think a lot of times we feel like God can't handle our rawest emotions. And the truth is, he created those emotions, and he wants to hear those emotions from us. And so tonight, we are finishing up this series, and tonight we're simply talking about how we need to practice facing our fears. A couple years ago, my parents took our family to Disney World, which we were super excited about. We got a chance to go to the Magic Kingdom and experience the magic of Disney World. But as we got ready to go on the trip, Kirsten and I had some fears going into the trip. Because we realized this is the most magical place on earth, and it's going to be awesome, but we had also heard the horror stories. You know, you hear the stories of the kid that gets taken when they get separated from their parents at Disney World. You hear the stories of the kid that gets horribly hurt or killed on a ride or due to a freak accident at Disney World on a ride or at one of the resorts. And our fear was that this incredible vacation, this incredible opportunity would suddenly turn into a horrific tragedy. And we had to wrestle with this idea of the fear of, okay, there's 4 kids. They're all going to be really excited. They've never been to Disney World. They're going to be going a whole bunch of different directions. And what's the possibility that they're going to wander off, and as adults, we're just going to miss it? And so we did some research. We tried to understand our fear, and we did some research, best practices for what happens if your kid gets separated from you at Disney and what you do. And so we came to some conclusions as to how we were going to accomplish or help alleviate the chance of that fear coming true. And our situation was this. We talked to the kids and we explained to them, you got to pay attention. There's going to be crazy stuff everywhere you've never seen. We want you to stay with us. If you get separated, go find a mom with other kids. That's going to be the safest person you can talk to. And then we made the decision that every morning we were just going to snap a picture of our kids so that if we got separated in the midst of that anxiety, we could say, here's exactly what our kids were wearing. And that we didn't have to try to think back through the day. And so that's how we were going to negotiate that fear. But it was a very real fear. And we prayed going into that vacation that it was going to be a great and a wonderful time and everybody would come back home safely. This entire month, we've been looking at how Jesus navigated his own fears leading up to the cross. We've looked at how Jesus felt fear, that he was not just this robot moving forward into the future and saying, I'm going to go to the cross. No, Jesus had some very real fears moving forward into the cross. And the truth is that Jesus practiced his fears. He practiced facing his fears. You can see that time and time again, and we could go through the Gospels and we could look at all the times that Jesus went away by himself to pray, that he went to a solitary place. I am convinced, guys, that Jesus went away by himself to pray because oftentimes it was a time where he could gain political power, but he knew there was something greater to come, but that something greater to come was going to be fearful. And I'm convinced that oftentimes we don't have it recorded what he prayed about. But my guess is, and this is just from my brain, so, take that with a grain of salt. But my guess is he was often talking to God about the future and about what he was going to face. And he was coming to God and being honest and facing his fears. We could talk about all the times that Jesus was honest and just said, hey, to multiple groups of people, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to the cross. He was naming his fear. He was going to say, I know what the future holds. But if we just look at the verses we've looked at this last month, a lot of verses are going to come on the screen. I'm not going to read them all, just so you guys know. But if we just look at those verses, we can see this rhythm in Jesus' life where he practices facing his fear, where he practices naming it, understanding it, praying into it, naming it, understanding it, praying into it. We see him naming his fear in John 13. He talked about how he was troubled in spirit, and he said, all of you are going to disown me, and one of you is going to betray me. We can see it in John 13. He says, I'm not going to be with you very long. He tells Peter, you're going to deny me. We see him naming these fears, and then we see him beginning to comprehend and understand and kind of work out in his own life how these fears are going to come to pass. He says to Judas, whatever you're going to do it quickly. Like, let's go. Let's do this thing. I know it's going to happen. I understand it. Let's go do this thing. We can see in John chapter 13, he says, I'm not going to be around. Love one another. And we see in John chapter 14, again, he says, I'm not going to be with you much longer, but you will live. And we see him praying into his fear. We looked at this a lot last week where Jesus goes to the garden 3 times and he prays and he prays and he prays that the cross would not happen in his life. But he says, whatever you plan, God, I'm there. Whatever your will is, I'm there. And I love that he does this and he practices this over and over and over and over. A lot of times I think we struggle to practice facing our fears. Now I know it's not Christmas yet. All right? I know we still have Thanksgiving. I'm going to be honest. We're going to put up our Christmas tree tomorrow. And so I could not show this clip because I think this clip really is a perfect illustration for how we face most of our fears. There we go. So, Home Alone, classic Christmas movie, but I think a lot of times that's how we face our fears. We live in a society that is instant gratification. We live in a society where we want things to happen in a step-by-step process. We want it one and done. We want it to be done and over with. And so what I think a lot of times happens in my own mind, and probably if you're anything like me, happens in your mind also, is we say, all right, I've got this fear in my life. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to name it. I'm going to understand it. I'm going to pray into it, and then it's going to be gone. And we walk out into the world, and we're like Kevin McAllister screaming, you hear me? I'm not afraid anymore. And then this fear pops right back up in our face. And we turn, and we run, and we go hiding under the covers, feeling completely defeated. And a lot of times what happens is we give up. You see, practicing facing our fears is vital. Because here's the truth, and I'm going to say something that is probably not very popular, and you probably may disagree with, and that's okay. You can disagree with me, that's fine. Your fear, not like your little fears, but that big, deep down, dark fear that you fear, and all of the things that formed that fear and caused that fear to rise up within you, that's never going to go away. It may change throughout the years, but all of the things that you feel inside that cause that deep down, dark fear, the thing that you can't admit to anyone else, that is never going to go away. And this is why practicing facing our fears is so vital. We see Jesus give us this perfect example of how to practice facing our fears. And he was the perfect example for a fear that was not going to go away. The cross was in his future. It was non-negotiable. It was non-deniable. There was nothing that he could do about it. The cross was coming. And we've walked through John, and then we followed his story into Matthew. And we've seen that he named his fear time and time again, and he understood his fear. And when he leaves the upper room with his disciples, we even talked about that's the first week. He says, all right, let's go do this. And we see him from the moment he left the upper room where he had named it and understood it. And obviously he'd spent time with God praying about it throughout the course of his ministry. He leaves the upper room saying, let's go do this. He gets to the Garden of Gethsemane, and that fear pops up again. And guess what? He goes and he starts praying about it, and he starts the whole process over again. He names it. He says, God, I don't want to go to the cross. And he begins to think about it and comprehend it, and he understands, and he says, but if it's your will, I'm in. You see, our fears will never go away. But we can improve our lives and how we handle, you guys listening? We can improve our lives and how we handle our fears if we practice facing those fears. We went to Disney World, and it was the third day we were there, second day in the park. We took these pictures of our kids that morning, as we were getting ready to go to the animal kingdom. We went to the animal kingdom. We were having a blast, looking at all the animals, checking everything out. And we had just gotten a snack, and we started off again. And about 5 minutes on to the next place, Kirsten comes running up behind me, and she says, "Where's Clark?" And I'm like, "I don't know. Isn't she back there with you?" "Nope, she's not with us." And we look at my parents, and they're like, "She's not with us." And very quickly, we realize, after a few times of screaming Clark's name as loud as we possibly could, she is nowhere around. Like, nowhere. Like, we've walked back where we walked from. I've trotted up ahead of us. She is nowhere to be found. And our biggest fears are starting to come true, like there's this anxiety rising inside of us. We realized this was a possibility, this was a fear, and Clark is now, like, she's gone, she's missing, she's gone somewhere. And so my mom goes off on a path. Kirsten takes the picture of Clark, and she goes to find an employee and comes to all of us adults and says, "This is what Clark was wearing. Right here, this picture right here." And so we're like, okay, we've got that down. And so my mom goes up a path. My dad stays with the kids. Kirsten goes and finds a park employee and says, "My daughter's missing." They start to get on a radio, and I kind of go off on a path off to the side thinking maybe she wandered down the way. Now, this felt like forever. In reality, it was probably only 5 minutes, but about 5 minutes later, I found Clark crying, talking to a lady that was trying to help her. But there was this incredible fear that rose up inside of us, a fear that we had feared beforehand, that we hoped wouldn't happen, but realized there's a possibility with 4 kids that this could possibly happen. How are we going to handle this? And in that moment, we had practiced facing that fear enough that we had, although there was the fear and the anxiety, there was a calmness about us that allowed us to know what we needed to do to find Clark as quickly as possible. You see, because here's what we did. We woke up every morning and we faced the fear, today could be the day we lose our kids. You know, and when you face fear and you face it over and over and over and over and over and over, and that fear just keeps creeping up and bottling up, what happens is you either face it or you ignore it. Those are your 2 options. And you face it and you practice facing it over and over, or you just start to ignore it. And so we could have ignored it. We could have said, "You know what? It's a fear. We're nervous we're going to lose our kids. And this is something that we're really worried about, but it's probably not going to happen." And we could have moved on. But every morning we woke up and we said, this could be the day that one of our kids wanders off. Everybody line up. Snap, 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 snap. And we had to face that fear daily. Here's the beauty about facing your fears. The beauty about facing your fears is that it makes you a better person. You see, we see Jesus in the Gospels facing his fears time and time and time again. We see him asking himself some pretty serious questions. And we see him practicing facing his fears. And just like practicing a sport or an instrument, the more we practice facing our fears, the better we will get at facing our fears. The better we'll get at understanding our fears. The better we'll get at minimizing the effects of our fears. And the better we will be prepared if, heaven forbid, our fears become a reality. And isn't this what we want? We want to be better at understanding our fears. We want to be better at facing our fears. We want to be better at minimizing the effects that fear has on our lives. We don't want fear to control us. We don't want fear to drag us down and pull us to a place that we don't like. No, we want to minimize the effects, and we want to get better at it. And if that fear becomes a reality, we want to have practiced it enough that we are ready for it. Not that it will be easy, but that we will be more prepared to handle it. And this makes us better people. I admitted to you guys the first week when we talked about naming our fears. I said my biggest fear is that I will fail as a husband or father. That fear creeps up in my own life often. And so I have two choices. I could ignore it and I could say, I'm doing a pretty good job. Things are going well. Or every time that fear creeps up, I could start to ask myself some pretty serious questions. All right, let's talk about this. What is it about this fear that made it a part of my life? How am I doing as a husband or a father? How can I do better as a husband or a father? What are some things that I could do to minimize the chances that I'm going to fail as a husband or father? And you see, when we don't ignore our fears, but we ask those questions and we practice and we practice and we practice, every time we practice facing our fears, we get better. You see, every time I'm faced with the fear of, man, what if I fail as a husband or a father, and I start to ask myself some questions, it helps me become a better husband. And it helps me become a better father. And it helps me become a better person. And as Jesus started going to the cross and he faced that fear over and over and over and over and over again, as he told people time and time again, listen, I'm going to die and I'm going to raise 3 days later and I won't be with you much longer and you're going to betray me and you're going to deny me and all of you guys are going to leave me. He was practicing facing so that when that moment came, he was more prepared to handle it, and he was able to walk toward the cross with confidence, knowing that he had practiced and practiced and practiced, and he was ready to face his fear. So my question for you tonight is simply this. What is your big fear? You see, Jesus gave us an incredible example of how to practice facing our fears. We often look at the cross and we think of Jesus and his salvation. But I want us to look at the cross and see something else as well. I want us to look at the cross and see, yes, Jesus gave us salvation in that moment. But Jesus also gave us a perfect example for how to face our fears. So what's your big fear? Maybe you're stuck in addiction and you fear that you will never get out. You fear that if you told someone, your life would fall apart. Maybe you're dealing with a really hard time right now, and you're afraid everything's going to crumble to pieces. Maybe there's something in your life that you have a fear about and you don't quite understand it. You've never really talked about it. You've never really told anybody about it, but it's there. This week, I want you to take a step. Take a step in your faith. Take a step in your fear. And this week, I want to encourage you to start the process of facing that fear. Tell a trusted adult. Ask for some help. Talk to someone that can help walk you through that process. And I would love to be that person for you if that's something you're dealing with. But if we continue to ignore our fears, we continue to allow fear to control us, it will just push us back further and further and further. And it's only when we turn around and we face it that we gain more freedom from it. And Jesus went to the cross And Jesus gives us direction for our lives so that we can be free. And so this week, the practical challenge is that you would take a step toward freedom, that you would talk to someone about your fear. Check this out.